Welcome to the Integrated Schools Podcast. I'm Andrew, a white dad from Denver.
And I'm Val, a black mom from North Carolina.
And this is Caring for Your Community in a Time of Crisis on the ground in Minneapolis. We've got a bit of a heavy one today, Val.
It's more than a bit heavy. What is happening in Minneapolis is real and scary and tragic for so many. And yet there are people there who are rallying together to love on their community members.
I mean, I certainly, had been following the news, knew that things were pretty rough in Minneapolis. And Integrated Schools has a big chapter in Minneapolis. So I reached out to Paula, our chapter leader, mostly just to check in and see how she was doing and ask if there was any way that the National Integrated Schools Organization could support. And then ask, if there were lessons, things that she was seeing on the ground, things that she had learned that would be useful to share with our wider audience. And she had all sorts of inspiring stories about community coming together. And one that really piqued my interest was a chapter member of theirs, a woman who we're going to call Carina for this episode, who has been organizing parents for 4 or 5 years in Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. Her son speaks Spanish, and she wanted to support that and got involved with some dual language schools in Minneapolis and a parent organizing group there, and I think was really instrumental in kind of shifting the way that organization functioned. Mm-hmm. It had been functioning as really kind of a super PTA, a group of 5 schools who came together, and sort of all the things that point listeners back to our PTA So White episode, mm-hmm. all the ways that PTA can so often go wrong despite best intentions. And so she really did some amazing work, I think, in sort of pushing that organization to have more representation on their board from Spanish-speaking leaders in the community, doing a lot of work around language justice and providing translation and interpretation, and just really some amazing work. And the organization built very strong relationships with a number of people in the community and was really uniquely situated when ICE showed up in Minneapolis to jump into action and start supporting the community.
That's right. And I do want to emphasize the resume that you laid out. They were already within the community, learning the needs, centering the community, and that really made the action that they took in response to what was going on in Minneapolis something that was relevant, timely, and important to the community that they serve.
Yeah. Those relationships that she started out building, and I think as listeners will hear, when you get to know Carina a little bit, she's sort of uniquely positioned. She is bilingual. She's spent a lot of time in the Dominican Republic and views her role as being sort of a bridge. Yeah. And was really able to create a space where everybody could show up and get to know each other and deepen their ties to each other. And it was those ties that really supported this organization when crisis came.
Now, Carina does not come alone to our episode. She also brought some amazing people to join her.
Yes. So when I spoke to her about coming on the podcast, she was very willing to come and tell her story, but also was very clear that it is not just her story, and that if we really want to get to the heart of the challenges that Minneapolis is facing right now, we really need to be speaking to those most impacted. And certainly I would say Carina has been impacted, but she recommended we also include the voice of a monolingual Spanish-speaking member of the organization that she works with, a woman who we're going to call Cisne for this episode. And we're not going to give Carina's real name or Cisne's real name or the name of the organization throughout this episode because they are understandably concerned about potential blowback and don't want to be attracting attention in this time, which I think is a valid concern. So we're going to try our best to protect their identities.
That's right. Having both Carina and Cisne in conversation was remarkable. And I think what made it exceptionally meaningful to me is that Cisne was able to speak in her native language with the support of an interpreter. And that transformed the conversation.
Absolutely.
It took us right into Cisne's perspective, clarity to what she was experiencing. It was necessary for the storytelling in this episode.
Yeah, when Carina said, I have this monolingual Spanish-speaking guest that I think you should have on the podcast, I was like, absolutely, and how are we going to pull this off? And she brought along her friend, who we're going to just call the interpreter. Mm-hmm. She's a professional simultaneous interpreter, and we recorded on Zoom, which, shout out to Zoom, has a real-time interpreting function so that we had the whole conversation in English. Cisne had the whole conversation in Spanish. Basically in real time. We weren't sitting around waiting for translation. It felt like a very natural conversation that we were all able to participate in. And I'm so grateful to Carina for recommending the interpreter and to the interpreter for joining us and sharing her gifts with us to facilitate this conversation.
I want to say thank you again because you can read about what's happening, you can watch, social media or the news, but to hear from someone who is restricted to her home at this point for her safety and the safety of her child changes everything.
Yeah, and a sort of extra special treat, the interpreter stuck around when the conversation was over. And, in her role as interpreter, her job is to faithfully represent the conversation that's happening and not really bring her voice to the conversation. But it didn't take much digging to see quickly that there was a whole lot more going on for her, that she really views her job in interpreting as her part of social justice. And once we got her talking about that, she had so many fascinating things to say. So stick around. At the end of the episode, we'll play a little snippet of that conversation with her about sort of how she views this role and the importance of language justice and the importance of people actually, being able to have their voices heard and know that their voices are being heard in real time, that it's not a summary, but that it is a professional interpretation of the words they're saying in real time that allow them to be part of a conversation.
Yeah.
So, listeners, prepare yourselves. It is a heavy conversation, but not one without hope. And certainly some very inspiring stories of organizing and the power of relationships to keep us safe, or as safe as we can be kept in these trying times. So,
yeah. Thank you. I'm so excited.
All right, shall we take a listen?
We should.
Buenas noches, yo soy Cisne.
Good evening. I'm Cisne. I am a mother with a student in a public schools in the dual language program. My child is in 6th grade, so I know the bilingual pathway since he was in kinder. It was a dream as a child to be able to be bilingual, but the circumstances were not the same as they are for my son. And when they told me that there was a possibility that part of his learning could be a dual language program, I didn't hesitate. Now in 6th grade, I can see that it's been worth sticking on this path. And I feel very happy for him because he feels comfortable speaking both languages. It's a big advance that he has received. And as a mother, it makes me feel very proud.
That's beautiful.
That
Carina.
is beautiful.
My name is Carina. I am a white mom from Minneapolis, and my family was born and made in the Dominican Republic. I went to Minneapolis public schools from kindergarten through 12th grade, and I didn't have the opportunity to be in a dual language setting when I was growing up. But I did learn Spanish as a child. So I was kind of a cultural chameleon, and I learned Spanish in unconventional ways. I became a mother in the Dominican Republic. My son was born there, and when the pandemic hit, our path took us back to the US, and it was the first time for my son and my husband to try out the US experiment. We were just going to try it out for a couple of years and see how it treated us as a family. It's been very difficult, especially trying to get a spot in the dual language program. I learned about, gatekeeping and who is this program for, who's really centered here. We eventually got into one of those 3 elementary schools, but that was my entry into dual language advocacy. As my own privileged newcomer experience it was very difficult to find a spot, even with like poster child, right? Like he was born in the DR, his dad's Afro-Latino, his mom is white English speaker, dual language teacher. My whole career was teaching in a dual language setting
Oh, wow.
in New York.
Yeah.
And so we were very well positioned to advocate. In fact, I got connected to the organization that Cisne and I are connected through because dual language is the most important thing to my family.
Tell us a bit about the organization. So it's broadly speaking, sort of a parent-based organizing nonprofit that serves those 3 elementary schools and the middle school and the high school, all for the dual language families. Tell us a bit more about the organization.
Yeah, it was formed before I walked into it, but it was formed out of this redistricting that happened in our city. And there was one school that was being split up And so a lot of the founding parents came from that school, very angry that their school community was being broken up and they were being scattered across the city. And so when I came into the organization, it was a lot of white parents. There was a Dominican president. So I made a connection there and started going to meetings and realized that, all the meetings were in English. There was very little like new immigrant representation, and they were really focused on fundraising. And so let's pool our resources together. And at that point, the resources were about $50,000 that were left over in the PTA bank account from that school that got broken up. That's how much money they had left over.
They had $50,000 left over in the PTA.
And so they're like, well, let's use this money to start a nonprofit. and that's how the organization was born.
We're just trying to get the cookies at the event.
Right.
Let alone start a nonprofit with the leftover resources.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. When I came from the Dominican Republic, I had no idea of this like monster that is like PTAs and PTOs. Like I had never parented in the US, and I went to my first PTA meeting and I was just like, okay, I had no idea what I was walking into.
So it sounds like it was very much a traditional PTA in all the ways that the structures that we think about when we think about PTA shows up. As sort of you got more and more involved and you brought your unique perspective. I think it's like fascinating thinking about not just arriving in the U.S., but parenting for the first time in the U.S. culture. That's fascinating to me. But you sort of brought your own perspective. How did you hope to shift that organizational culture when you got involved?
Well, for me, it started with relationships. Even though I'm from Minneapolis, I had been away for 20 years. And I came back, and the first person I met at that PTA meeting was the president at the time, who was actually Latina. And she's still a big part of our organization today. And she's my best comadre at the school still. We both have kids in 5th grade. And during the meeting, when they were like passing out sheets of budget, and she was in the front, like she was leading, but like it was clear that she did not have the power. Like she had not made the agenda. She was not familiar with the budget. She was like a very great meeting opener, had a strong voice, but you could tell she had been kind of disempowered by the system and access to information and all that stuff. So we met at that meeting, and soon there was an email that came out that was like, who wants to host teacher appreciation lunch? And I was like, oh, I appreciate teachers. I was a teacher. I signed up, and this mom was the person who brought this huge pot of tamales. And then like all the white parents like signed up on the sign up genius with like their food. And this parent came to me and she was like, oh my goodness, Carina, you have done something I've never been able to do as president, which is like have the Latinos come and sign up via WhatsApp with their food, and have the white parents also sign up with their food and make this amazing lunch. It's been so hard for me to bridge that gap. And so she handed me her tamales and she's like, you be president. And I was like, oh no, not so fast.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, clearly you've been disempowered. I'm not just going to be president. I don't know what I'm doing either, but let's talk about how you navigated the system. And so that was my in, like through a relationship with her.
Yeah. I'm curious about your position as that bridge. Is that something that you embraced? Was it like challenging? Like, how did you navigate being the bridge between the two communities?
I very much embrace that. I think that's one of my like core identity markers is being a bridge, because I was able to kind of live a periphery newcomer experience through my husband's experience and through my son spending the majority of his life in the Dominican Republic. But I'm also, live in my body and it's not my experience, but I'm bilingual and I'm able to bridge cultures, and I'm deeply relational. And so, and I've also been a teacher. And so also as a parent, I can understand the teacher's perspective. I've also been a school administrator, so I can understand the school administrator's perspective. So I'm constantly bridging, not just language, but experience and kind of worldview, and understanding that just just like my experience is not everyone's experience. And there's so many things that we take for granted that everyone experiences in the same way. That's just not true.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you were like uniquely positioned to nudge this organization to a more inclusive, a more decentering of traditional voices that had been centered there. You brought in a unique skill set, and it sounds like the organization needed it in that moment.
Yeah, I think so.
Cisne, tell us about your introduction to the organization and kind of what drew you to it and what you found when you got there.
Well, I met the organization through text messages. I would get a lot of information, and they would say, this is the organization that helps the families, that helps the 5 schools, but I didn't know what it did. Personally, I was very involved in one of the schools that I supported, and my internal work was as a volunteer. And so they made a meeting for Latino parents, and Carina said, can you go to that? And I said, I don't have a lot of interest in going because it's hard for me with transportation. She said, I'll pick you up. I said, okay. When Carina told me, do you want to be part of this organization? And I said, what's it about? What do you do? I'd like to know a little more. And that's when she told me, you could join the meeting. And me, I thought that meeting was exclusive for certain people or for white parents. I saw the links, but I never thought it was for me until I got this invitation. And I listened, and they said a lot of nice things, like they gave resources, economic resources, they did events, they had resources for teachers, and it piqued my interest. That's how I moved in the school. So I said, well, it could be a bigger way to be able to have potential to use my skills in another place. And that's when Carina said, there's a position. You could be the next one. And I said, next what? What do they do? I'm always very structured. I like order. And I said, share, what does this leader do? What are their responsibilities? Because it's not just to put my name, but I have to know what is my responsibility. And Carina told me what it meant, and I read it. And I said, okay, it makes sense, and it goes with what I value and what I want to do. I will give myself the opportunity. And I said, okay, next year I will take that role. And that's how it started. The connection became a lot stronger with the administration in the school that I represented, and they began to see me as a way, well, you could say that they could trust me, that things were structured. There was a little bit of reserve against the organization because they thought they were coming to impose things. But my way to come to them was the way to come through collaboration. That's how we maintain, is to stay connected and maintain communication. I am very responsible in what I participate in. So Carina was always pushing me, saying, no, you can do it. You can do it. You're a communicator. You could take on this role, even if you're not too present. So she would motivate me. We were trying to develop Spanish leaders, and that's where I started to open up a meeting to welcome these people so they could talk about what they do. And in that process, they promoted me to be the vice president of this organization. And it's something I wasn't looking for. I just wanted to have a break for me. But along the way, they kept pulling me, and they nominated me. And I said, okay, sounds good. If this is happening now, it's for a reason, so I can do it. It happened during this time of crisis. As a family, I have to stay at home. I'm in the same situation as a lot of vulnerable families. So this time, I've seen it as something positive, not just the negative that is going on outside.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
Carina, I am sitting here just in awe of your ability and desire to share that power, to like recognize that it's there and to share it with others. And Cisne, I'm so thankful that, like having a friend like Carina can be dangerous, right? You're like, no, I need to rest. She's like, rest later. So that can be dangerous. So I'm excited that you stepped into that role as well. Carina, can you talk a little bit about like where and how you learned how to share that power? Because I think that is important for many of our other caregivers to hear, because they're walking into similar spaces. And we're trying not to step on toes. We want to build with the communities that are already there. So can you talk a little bit about how you developed that?
Yeah, I mean, here, of course, the people who I could see are leaders who've just been kept out of power because of ways that parents interact with schools. And so when I came back into Minneapolis after being away for 20 years, right on the coattails of George Floyd's murder, when I came back, I knew that I had to relearn my city and relearn like how to operate in the US as not a person who knows, but a person who's curious and almost like a visitor in my hometown. So it was my chance to make kind of a new friends circle and to be really intentional about who I invest my time and energy in. And like I said, from that first interaction with my tamales comadre, I knew who had the answers about how we could build more power with parents and school collaborating. And I was just baffled by how we could have, 70% Latino parents, but then you go to any kind of meeting and it's 70% white, right? And so I was like, this does not make sense. And this is in a dual language school. And so I knew that we had to, ask the people who have been marginalized, like, what's keeping you out, and really follow their lead, because everyone else is sitting around and be like, we invited them, they didn't come. We translated the flyer, they still didn't come. We got an interpreter, they still didn't come. And so it's none of those, those are some basic, very easy things to fix, but the harder things to fix are how you wield power once you get into those spaces. And it's really obvious. I mean, it's obvious in which language is spoken first. So many meetings that, the facilitator will speak English and then there will be Spanish interpretation. And then they'll say something like, any questions? And by the time it's interpreted into Spanish, there is no time for questions. You're like the English speaker is just moving on. And they're like, well, they didn't say anything. I wonder why they didn't say anything. Everything's fine. They had no questions, no problems. Carry on. A lot of it is being, some things you can see because you're bilingual and you're like, whoa, if I were operating in Spanish here, that would not be enough time. But even beyond that, it's just being aware of what feels like a turnoff, things that parents do, like selling chocolate. Doing fun runs where everyone goes out, this is classic integrated school stuff, but there was a lot of people who just saw them as like easy ways to make money. And at the school level, when I started partnering with Latino leaders, right, we were able to say, we don't have to do these things. There's plenty of things that we can do instead. Like, you don't have to do a fun run. You don't have to sell things. There's many ways to engage. And, we use community-centric fundraising principles. And there's many ways to give. In any situation, you have to offer multiple ways because every parent cares to engage in their students' education. But many times we have assumed that some parents don't want to or aren't able to, and that's completely wrong. And so we just had to undo a lot of the things that we had been spending a lot of energy doing in the past to be able to listen to a whole nother way of engagement and center that.
I was a high school teacher at one point, and I took over the yearbook. And I remember shortly after taking over the yearbook that first year, somebody came up to me and was like, Val, we have never had this many Black people in the yearbook before. And I was like, but they're at the school. Like, so of course we're going to have Black people in the yearbook. Have you experienced any sort of like white flight now that you are elevating leaders of color, caregivers of color in the organization?
Interestingly enough, yes, our board is majority Latino, majority Spanish dominant, majority immigrant right now. And just like I approach Cisne, I approach people who I see can fill certain needs. And some people who I approach who are not Latino will say, oh, but I'm not bilingual, or, oh, I don't. They use bilingual as a way to say, no, that space is not for me. But an interesting thing that's happening right now is that we're holding this like Tuesday night community care circle, this healing space that has a facilitator in English and a facilitator in Spanish, because everyone's experiencing trauma right now.
Yeah.
And we've done this for 3 weeks. We've only had one person come who prefers English. It's really interesting that we've made such a point, especially in these times, to like center the needs of our Latino families, that the English speakers are not coming to the healing space, which is not good either.
No, we need to heal together. That's the whole point of all of this, right?
Tell us a little bit about the work that you were prior to the current crisis that Minneapolis is in. What did the work of the organization look like kind of day to day? What sorts of things were you doing? How are you providing support as you shifted away from this primarily typical PTA, raise as much money as possible in ways that maybe are alienating to at least half of your community kind of version, and you shifted to this more community centric, a Latino led organization? What were the activities that you were largely engaged in before this current crisis?
Yeah, well, we had a lot of different kinds of parties with different themes.
Nice.
and so probably the most consistent thing in our organizational history is a soccer tournament. That's more than a soccer tournament, but it's a chance at the end of the year for all the schools to come together. Students play students, teachers play teachers, parents play with teachers against students. And so it's a 5-school soccer tournament in the spring. And now it has, our parents who cook and sell food are the vendors. We have cultural performances, dance groups, and musical acts, and it's more like a one-day celebration. So that's one, and we saw a lot of great leadership emerge. That was great. And then we also have a Dia de los Muertos celebration, which the cool thing about that is that it's always been Latino run, and so you can really see the difference in like how the planning meetings happen, how the budget is used, how resources are stretched. We had resource fairs. We had probably my proudest innovation has been the Buddy Family program, where even before this crisis, tried to buddy up families one-to-one with a newcomer family and a family that's knows how to get around here, to provide partnership and kind of solidarity, mutual support. My son's best friend came out of our buddyship, and that's what's really transformed my kind of understanding of what's needed, and especially in this crisis. But Cisne, what are some of your favorite things that we did before the crisis?
During the
time that I was a representative, we had a grant that permitted us to create and maintain the gardens. That was a really beautiful space where the parent volunteers would maintain them during the summer. For me, it was a beautiful experience because I felt included. And I also included other parents, because a lot of the resources are mostly for the students, and there's few spaces for parents to participate. Another thing that the organization did last year was an academy, that it was also to create community with the families, where there were different facilitators for writing, affinity groups for different areas. That was really nice because we got to meet a lot of people from other schools, because when there's festivities, but all the families are very dispersed, they're eating, playing, so there wasn't a space where we could really socialize the families. So these spaces where the academy was held created that space so we could connect, so we could create community, so we could get to know other people. And also the parking lot to raise funds. We did 2 parking lot fundraisers, one of art and one of of Pride Week. So we have two parking lots where we become volunteers from different schools, and it's another way to connect with other families, to meet them, to be doing something together for 1 hour or 2 hours. And that was really nice in all these spaces, be able to connect with them.
Yeah. When you mentioned a sense of belonging, I am curious about how you felt prior to Carina reaching out so many times. Like, did you feel like you belonged? Did your child feel like they belonged? Like, what was that relationship with the school before Carina reached out?
De parte de la escuela, sí. Tengo que
In the
ser
school,
honesta. De
yes.
parte
I
de
have
los
to say, be honest,
principales, de
from
los
the principal,
maestros,
the
era muy
teachers,
conocida. Todo el
I
mundo
was
me
very
conocía y
well
sabía
known. Everyone
incluso
knew
qué
me
hacía
and
y
they knew
qué
what I
podían pedir de
did
mí,
and what
etcétera.
they could ask
Pero
me
del
for,
grupo de
etc.
padres que
But the
existía,
parent group that
que es el
existed,
grupo que no,
no,
porque las decisiones
because
siempre
the
eran por
decisions were always
votos
by
de gente
vote
blanca. Y las
from
decisiones
white
eran desde
people,
su
and the
perspectiva,
decisions were
desde lo
from
que
their
ellos querían, desde
perspective and
lo
what
que
they
para
wanted
ellos era
and
bueno.
what for
Y
them
en
was
ese
good.
grupo la
And in
mamá
this group,
latina era yo.
I was the Latino mom.
Yo no me sentía
I
cómoda en
didn't
esos
feel
grupos porque
comfortable in
incluso
that
no había
group
un intérprete.
because there was an
La
interpreter.
interpretación era
The
hecha por otra
interpretation
persona
was
que
done
probablemente
from
hablaba
another
un poco
person
español,
that maybe
pero
spoke a
los
little
resúmenes eran
Spanish,
muy cortos o
but
muchas veces no
they had
entendía.
very brief
Salía de la
summaries or I
reunión
didn't
sin entender
understand. So
muchas
I would
cosas
leave the
y sin
meeting and I
poder
didn't
procesar.
understand a lot of things and I
Entonces,
couldn't process
yo
it.
le dije a Karina,
So I
me
told
gustaría
Carina,
estar,
I
pero
would
necesito
like to be, but
interpretación.
I need an
No puedo
interpreter.
seguir un
I
proceso
can't
sin recibir
continue
la
a
información
process
correcta.
without getting the
No puedo
correct
seguir en una
information.
organización
I can't
que
be in an
simplemente me dan
organization if you
resúmenes
just give
y
me
muchas
summaries,
veces toman
and a lot of
decisiones desde
times they
esos
make
resúmenes y yo
decisions
sin
from those
comprender.
summaries and I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah.
The theme that keeps coming up here is relationships, is connecting with people, emotionally connecting with people, caring about how people feel, focusing on relationships and focusing on building those spaces where people feel like they can belong. That feels like such a powerful lesson for people to take away, thinking about trying to create spaces where we really want, representation and want people to show up as their full, authentic selves. I want to talk a little bit about the kind of current crisis we're in now. And maybe we're sort of coming towards the end of the acute crisis in Minneapolis, but I'm sure that there are so many things that are just now beginning to rear their heads as we come out of the acute portion, and there's so much rebuilding and repair to be made there. But day to day, at the peak of the crisis, what were the major challenges? I know, like we've talked about, people feeling like they were on lockdown, people not able to leave their houses. Give us a little bit of a sense of what it felt like, or of what the day-to-day actually looked like for people who weren't there, maybe don't have any idea kind of just how bad things got.
A year ago at conferences, we had a DOPA drive. DOPA means designation of parental authority. And so we helped families a year ago set up plans, like emergency plans for their children, for their belongings, the power of attorney, and travel consent. We did those a year ago. Turns out they all expire a year later. But I'm a year into already being committed to about 12 families. I'm the guardian of about 12 families' kids. This is not something I looked for or that I think is a good idea for anyone, but this is like a symptom of our society right now, is that this many families have come here and engaged in community. And when it came time to find somebody less vulnerable than themselves to put as their guardian, they didn't know anybody else besides me. Right. And so I said, yes, and then so now we're renewing those. Of course, we're doing grocery shopping for those families. And on Tuesday, I'm taking 18 kids to the dentist.
Oh, right. Those are things that you don't even think about, right? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Our first rent payments went out in December, whereas right now is when a lot of people are catching up and realizing people are 3 months behind on rent. So it's almost gotten to a point where it feels normal to be just always carrying around things in my car and dropping them off. But I've tried to get out of the weeds a little bit and think about okay, if my 12 families need to do this DOPA renewal at home, we need a system for people to sign up and for lawyers and notaries to go to people's houses in a safe way and now it's scaled to schools even outside of our organization.
Yeah. Cisne, what has been the day-to-day like for you, for your family, for the people in your community since ICE arrived?
Bueno, yo traté de continuar
I tried
trabajando
to
porque
continue
soy
working
babysitter.
because I'm a
Trabajo
babysitter.
cuidando a un niño
I work with taking
desde
care
que
of
nació
children
y el impacto fue
since the
fuerte
baby
porque
was born,
aunque
but
seguía
the impact
trabajando,
was
iba con
hard.
miedo
Even though I kept
en el
working, I
bus,
would go with fear on the bus.
sí veía
If
incidencias
I
de ICE y
see
me
incidents
preocupaba.
of
Yo
ICE, I would
decía,
get concerned because I
no
would
voy a llegar a
say,
casa
I'm not going to make it
y
home.
la preocupación de mi
And
hijo
my
era,
concern with my son,
mamá va a llegar a casa o no va a llegar.
he was always worried, is mom going to come home or not?
Llegó un punto donde
It got
tuve que
to a
elegir
point that
entre
I
la
had
parte
to pick
emocional
between the
y,
emotional
y la
part
necesidad económica.
and the economic
Y
need.
pesó más la necesidad emocional.
And
Y
it was
decidí
heavier the
quedarme en
emotional need. So
casa después de la
I
muerte de
stayed
René,
home after
porque
Renee
ese fue el
was
hecho que
killed
impactó,
because
creo que a
that
toda la
impacted
comunidad.
the whole community.
Y ahí sentí
And
realmente el
that's where
miedo.
I
Y
felt
dije,
real
esto ya no
fear.
es seguro para
And I
nadie.
said, this is not safe anymore for anyone.
Fue muy difícil
It was very hard
soltar a esta familia
to
porque
let
había
go of
creado
this family
conexión con
because
ellos.
I had a
También
strong
porque
connection with them.
después de la pandemia,
Also,
mi
after the
familia igual tuvo los
pandemic,
estragos. Fue muy difícil
my
conseguir
family,
trabajo,
it was
tener
hard
un
for us to
trabajo
find
estable.
work, to have
Duré
stable
como
work.
2 años
I
para
was like
conseguir
2
realmente un
years
trabajo
trying to find
estable.
a
Y
stable
esta
job.
familia me dio la
And this
oportunidad.
family gave me the
Y estaba como
opportunity.
volviendo otra vez al
And
pasado.
I was like going back to the
Otra vez
past
vivir lo
again.
mismo. Era muy difícil.
It was very hard.
Pero realmente me sentí luego
But
esperanzada
I
porque
felt
sabía que
hope
estaba de cierta manera un
because
poco
I
más
knew
segura
I was a
con
little
mi
more
hijo en
secure
casa.
with my son at home.
Y ahí fue cuando
And that's when
realmente la parte emocional
the emotional
empieza
part
a ser más
starts to
profunda,
be more profound
porque
because
empiezas a ver de que estás prisionera.
you feel
No
like you're a
tienes la
prison.
libertad para
You don't
salir.
have your freedom.
Y nos ha tocado vivir esa etapa. No
And
he
we
salido
have
para
to live this.
absolutamente
I have
nada.
not gone out for anything.
He dejado mis tratamientos médicos.
I've stopped my medical
Sí ha
treatment.
habido mucha incidencia.
There's
Ha
been a lot of
incidido mucho en mi
incidences
familia
in my
el
family.
tener
They've
acceso
been
inclusive
scared to get
pero el lado
medical
positivo de
attention
esto
because
es
of
que he
something
podido
happened.
conectar
But
con
the
90
positive thing
familias
is I've been able to connect with 90
para poder
families
soportarlos
to be able to support
en
them
diferente tipo de
in
ayudas.
different
Ha sido un espacio
ways
que me
of
ha
help.
mantenido
It's been a space that
ocupada
has kept
y
me
que no
busy
caiga realmente en una
and that I
depresión.
don't fall
Porque yo
into
pienso que si no
depression
hubiera estado en
because
esos
I think if
procesos de
I
comunicar
haven't
con
been
otros,
in this
hubiera sido
process
más
to
fácil caer
communicate
en
with
una
others, it would
depresión,
have been easier to
en hechos de
fall
ansiedad, sí
into
ha sido
a
muy difícil,
depression.
muy
So it's been
complejo.
really hard,
Esto que está
really
ocurriendo nos ha
complex.
afectado de todas
This
maneras,
that's been happening to us is
económica,
happening,
emocional,
it's been
mental,
affecting us mentally,
inclusive con
emotionally,
la familia.
financially, even with the families.
Genera a veces
It
conflictos,
creates
¿verdad?
conflict
Entonces,
sometimes with families.
puedo decir que las situaciones
So the
que hoy
situation
vivo
that
yo
I live
están
today,
viviendo muchas
many
familias,
families are living.
porque he hablado con 90 familias
I've talked with
y
90
hay cosas que
families,
a veces se
and there are
asemejan a lo que
things
nosotros
that
vivimos
I
y
can see
realmente
it's what we're
no
living.
es nada sencillo lo que
So
estamos
it's
viviendo
nothing
desde adentro
simple what we're
yo
living,
realmente digo que
having to stay at home.
estamos prisioneros
And
en la
I
misma
really feel
casa
like we're
y vivir
prisoners
eso
in our
es
own
muy
home.
fuerte,
And to live that
es
is
muy
very
fuerte, pero
difficult.
tenemos la esperanza de que nos
But
va
we
a
have the
tomar
hope.
años
It's going to
para
take
volver a tener
years
confianza
to be able to trust again,
al salir o al exponernos
to
otra
be able
vez
to
para
go
afuera.
out
Entonces,
again and feel
pero sé
that
que
we
la
can do it.
comunidad también ha estado con
But I
nosotros.
know the
Recibí
community's been
cartas
with us. I've
de otros
received
estados,
letters
de
from other
niños que
states, from
están,
kids
de gente
that
que
are
se
writing
preocupa
to
y
us, that are
preguntarnos
people
qué
that are
necesitamos o qué
concerned
nos
about
hace
us, that
falta.
ask us, what do you need?
Ha sido un aliado para nosotros seguir soportando
It's
y
been
seguir
something that's
manteniéndonos
helped us to
fuertes
continue
para
moving
no
along
decaer.
and being strong and not fall.
Pero también hay que reconocer que ha
But
habido
we also have to
familias
recognize that
que
there
lo
have
han
been
resentido
families
mucho más
that have
profundamente
felt
y
it
pues han dejado
much
el
more
país,
hard.
se han
They've
ido.
left the country. They're gone.
Y realmente a mí me duele porque
And that
venimos con los
hurts
mismos
me
sueños,
because we all come
venimos
with
con
the
las
same
mismas
dreams,
esperanzas
with the same hopes.
y pues la situación no ha sido nada bonita
And this
y
situation has
les ha
not
tocado
been
irse.
pretty, and they've had to leave.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. What are the conversations you have had or have had to have with the kids?
Bueno, particularmente con mi hijo,
Well,
cuando
with my
decidí
son,
dejar
when
de
I
trabajar,
decided
fue
to
algo que
stop
yo hablé con
working,
él y le
I
dije,
talked
vamos a
with
tomar
him
una
and I
decisión,
said, we're going to take a decision
porque mi hijo tenía pánico y
because
decía,
my
mamá, voy a ir
son
a la
had
escuela
panic. And
y
he's
esta
like, Mom,
persona
I'm
va
going
a
to go to
llamar a
school and
ICE.
this person is
Ella
going to
dijo
call
que va a
ICE.
llamar.
She said she was going to call
Le
ICE.
dije, vamos a tomar la
And I
decisión y
said,
nos
we're
vamos
going
a
to take
quedar
a
en casa y
decision
vamos
and
a
we're going to
estar
stay
bien.
at home and we're going to be okay.
Yo te aseguro que vamos a estar
I
bien.
want you to know that we're going to be okay.
Otra cosa que me ha ayudado es
So something else that
poder
helped
hablar con
me
la
was to
verdad
be
con él,
able
no
to
ocultarle
speak with
las
the
cosas
truth, not hide
y
things
decir
from
y
him
tener un plan.
and have a
Conmigo
plan.
hicimos un plan, él
With
tiene
him,
su
we made a
caja con
plan.
todos
He
sus
has his
documentos
box with all of his
que
documents
tiene que usar
that
si algo llegara a pasar.
he could use
Um,
if something were to happen.
y fue algo responsable realmente.
And it
Hablar
was
con
something
responsabilidad
to
con
talk
mi
about
hijo.
responsibility with
Eh,
my son.
y lo más bonito de él que lo asumió
The
con
most beautiful thing with
responsabilidad
him
también.
is he took it on as a
Y eso nos ha
responsibility
ayudado a
as well.
nosotros a
And that's
mantener
helped
como
us.
que tenemos un plan para lo que
We
va a
have a plan.
suceder y lo hemos
So if
hablado. Si
something
algo sucede
happens, we've
conmigo,
talked about it.
qué
If
va a
something happens
suceder
with me,
y cuál es el
what will
plan y lo
happen?
hemos
What
escrito
is
y
the plan? And we've
lo hemos
written it
escrito
down
para no olvidarlo.
to not forget it.
Y otro plan que tengo es pues
And
la
another plan that I
delegación que le
have
hice a
is
uno
the
de mis familiares,
delegation that I did
que
to one
mi
of
hijo
my
tiene que
families that
regresar
my
si algún
son,
día llegara a
if
pasar
something were to
algo,
happen,
porque no quiero volver a
I
repetir
don't
la
want
historia
to
familiar que
repeat
nos
the
criamos
same
sin
story
padres.
as my family that we were
Y,
raised without parents.
y otra cosa que nos ha ayudado es
And another thing that's helped
buscar
is
espacios para
find
relajarnos, como
spaces to
pintar,
relax, to
dibujar,
draw,
buscar
to
un espacio para
paint,
los
look
dos,
for a space for both of
a
us,
pesar de lo que
even
estamos
with all
viviendo.
that we are
Y,
living.
y hablar también cuando no queremos,
And
o
talk,
dejarle también su
or
espacio,
also
porque a
give him his
veces no quiere
space because
hablar,
sometimes he doesn't want to
a
talk.
veces también no puede dormir.
Sometimes he
Ha
can't
sido
sleep.
muchas incidencias y me ha
There's been a
tocado
lot of
acompañarle en todo este
incidences
proceso
when I've
y a
had to
veces
accompany him
me
during
pongo
this
a pensar en la
process. And
cantidad de
sometimes I
niños que
think
están
about
viviendo
the
eso,
amount of
¿verdad?
kids that are
Entonces
living this.
invade mucho más la, la
It
situación, el dolor,
invades so much more the
pero como
situation, the
familia,
pain.
mi
But
hijo y
as a
yo hemos
family,
optado por
my
eso,
son
tener
and
las
I,
cosas claras, tener un
we
plan
decided to have things clear,
para
to
lo que
have a
pudiera
plan
ocurrir
if
y
something
buscar
were to
un espacio
happen,
también para
and
poder
find a
relajarnos
space
porque
to relax.
esta situación sí nos
Because
ha
this
implicado
situation
mucho,
has
sobre todo
affected
mentalmente.
us a lot,
Entonces,
in particular
esa
with our
parte sí ha
mental health.
influido con nosotros, el poder hablar con
That's what
respeto
we've
y
been
con
doing, to be able to
responsabilidad.
talk with respect and with responsibility.
Thank you. And I hate he's in 5th grade, right?
Sexto
Sixth.
grado. Yeah.
6th grade.
Yeah. Not right. Carina, what conversations have you had with your family?
Yeah, my son's in 5th grade and he's very aware of everything. He's actually going to school because the way I think about it, I need him to go to school so I can keep holding up the community. And my husband is a therapist, a mental health therapist for immigrants in schools in Spanish, But my son asks, he knows that we're the guardians of a lot of kids. And he's like, where are they going to go? We don't have space in this place. And I'm like, it's not going to become an orphanage here. It just like every family's plan is that I take the kid to reunite with the family in Ecuador. Best case scenario, we get to go to Ecuador. And then he says, Poppy, they're going to take Poppy. And I say, one time he was cornered by ICE and he showed his green card and that was enough. Let's hope, right? But I can't make any promises. And then he says, when are we leaving? When are we going back to the Dominican Republic? And can't we go now? And yeah, would love to go. That's our goal. That's our plan, to go back together. But since my husband's in the middle of his naturalization process, like right now, the federal government is deciding whether he deserves to be a citizen or not. And that will just make like our lives crossing borders more easy. That's meant that I can't put my name out there. I can't put anything on social media. I can't use my real name with you all. We can't use the organization's name because we we are all vulnerable for being targeted. And especially at this point in my husband's immigration journey. Yeah, my son's very aware of where we are in it. And he's also very aware of how he's got a slightly different status just by being in school from most of his friends. More than half of his classmates are not there.
Yeah. For both of you, kind of what was the moment as this current crisis started that you knew that things were bad?
Well, I, in particular, lived an episode when someone at the school threatened my son to call these people. That's when I said, this is getting out of control. The situation is showing the real face of people that don't accept us as part of the community.
Ahí fue mi primera alarma y la segunda alarma fue
That was my first alarm. The second time was when the kids didn't want to go to class and they were asking for help with transportation. And we heard from the staff, there's more people not coming to school. And it's something that I said in a meeting, this is happening, this is going on. We should try to go and learn virtually. The crisis where the organization started to get more involved is when they said, oh, rent is due. We're close to having to owe money. The families are staying home. What are we going to do? And from that came many questions from many schools, many leaders in the schools. And there's like, what can we do? How can we generate funds to help with that need? And I said, well, I can do it. I said, I can do it. And I did it. We had a meeting with the team, and that's how it started. That's how mutual aid started, taking on that role to govern, but also to delegate. I've also received a lot of appreciations. They say I'm a good leader, that I'm bringing clear process, and that makes me feel good because with that vision I came in, and with that vision I'm also trying to create a balance of what we need and what we can do.
You know, we had a very small time with ICE2 here in Charlotte, and our community has not been the same since. It still feels like a ghost town, but my dad definitely called. He was like, those Minneapolis folks, man, they are just, we are so proud of y'all. So hang in there. Thank you for taking care of each other. Thank you for showing the rest of us how to love our neighbors well.
Carina, when did you know that things were bad?
Well, I was actually in California for work when Renee Good was killed. But personally, it hit home when I was coming back from California that week. My dad called me because he was at our house with my son, and he was meeting up with my husband, who was getting my son's best friend. You know, they're meeting up to have a play date to, you know, at that point, my son's friend's family was very much in lockdown, but getting stir crazy. He's a newcomer. He was our buddy family, and he was getting him from his house and coming to our house. And my husband actually encountered a checkpoint on the road where there's ICE agents with guns checking every car, and my husband's a green card holder. And so he was like, I don't want to be in that line. And so he left the checkpoint line and took another route home. And my dad called me because he said before my husband arrived home, 3 to 5 unmarked cars were at our house. So they didn't even follow him. They beat him back here. And so my dad was like, let's not do the kid exchange here. And so they met up in a school parking lot, exchanged the kids, waited it out. The agents left. But that's when I realized that, like, none of us is safe. You know, they completely scanned the license plates of my husband's car and said, oh, we know where you live. We're going to meet you there. And that's when it really got close to home, literally, for me.
Yeah, that's scary. You all had so much infrastructure in place already, so many relationships built already. But are there things that you wish you had known or wish you had done before ICE arrived that would have left you even better prepared? I mean, I think you're so much better prepared than so many people out there because of those relationships. But are there things you wish you had known ahead of time?
big gap, I think, is our preparedness and our foresight and the school districts. A month and a half into online learning, right? And at my kids' school, we still have 35 families that don't have hotspots. We should not be fundraising for hotspots,
Right.
but that's where we are. So that's one part of being prepared, right? Is like, that would have been nice to just like go into hybrid learning and be able to access class.
Mm-hmm. Cisne, are there things you wish you had known or been better prepared for?
Bueno, yo creo que particularmente como
Well,
familias
I think
afectadas,
families in
hubiera sido
particular who are
importante tener
affected, it
como
would have been nice to
información
have
de asesoría
information
legal, de saber cuáles son nuestros
about
derechos
legal
también
options, what are our
como
rights
inmigrantes,
as
¿verdad?
immigrants,
Porque muchas veces simplemente nos
because many
etiquetan como
times
sin
they
documentos,
just
pero no
say
sabemos que
have
detrás
these
de esto
documents, but we don't
hay
know
derechos que también
behind
nos
this there's
respaldan
also
y ese ha
rights
sido
that we
uno de
have.
los factores
And that's been one
de
of the
mayor
things
incidencia
of most
cuando ha
incidents
ido ICE
when
por
ICE has
alguien y
gone
no
for
saber sus
someone. They don't
derechos
know
y
their
no poder
rights.
respaldarse de esos
They
derechos
don't know
para
how
decir
to
no puedes
defend their
hacer esto
rights
que
and say
estás
you
haciendo,
can't do
¿verdad?
what you're
Entonces,
doing.
creo que es algo
I think it's
que es un gran
something that
aprendizaje
we learned a lot.
y realmente como familias
And
vulnerables, pues
also, as
pienso que
vulnerable
sí
families,
es
I think
importante
it's
tener
important
estas bases
to have
sobre lo que
these
nosotros podemos
basic things
respaldarnos
so that we
legalmente,
can
porque
support ourselves.
el estigma es que no tienes derechos.
Because
Es
the
lo que nos
stigma
hacen
is you
muchas
don't
veces
have
creer,
rights. That's
porque
what they make us
Right.
believe.
que ahora sabemos que no,
But now we know
hay
that's
derechos
not
que nos
true, that
respaldan
there
y no
are rights
solamente
that we
porque
have.
seas
And not
documentado o
just because you are
indocumentado, sino
documented
también
or
porque eres un
not
ser humano
documented, but it's
y
because
desde
you're a
ahí
human
vienen los
being.
principios
And that's
que
where
nos
it comes
rigen.
from.
Y eso ha sido muy importante,
That's been
la
really
educación a
important. The
nosotros.
education
Esa
for
educación ha
us,
ayudado a
that
muchas
education
familias a
has helped many
inclusive
families.
que te tocan la puerta y
They
sabes lo que
knock on the
puedes
door
decir,
and you know what
como
you can
manejar
say,
las tarjetitas
or you
rojas,
can have the
que
little red
es
cards.
una forma
It's
también de
a
identificar y
way to
decir,
identify
conozco
and
mis
say, I know
derechos.
my rights.
Y bueno, creo que eso
And
fue una
well, I think
sorpresa
that was a
para ICE,
surprise
de
for
que
ICE
nos estaban apoyando
that
con toda
they
esa
were
información
supporting
y
us
creo
with
que
all
desde
that
ahí venía como el
information.
desagrado
I
que ellos
think
están
that's where it came.
comunicados, ellos
They
saben, se están
know, they're
informando, la
informed.
gente les
People
está
are
dando estas
giving them this little
tarjetitas
red
rojas.
cards.
Entonces creo que también eso mucho más desencadenó
I think that
ira, el coraje de
also
ver que una
made them
comunidad se estaba
mad
uniendo
to see that the
para
community was
respaldarnos y para
united and
educarnos.
supporting us and educating us.
Y lo que yo digo ahora
And what I
es
say now
justamente como
is,
comunidad
as
aprender de
community,
esta
we need to
situación
learn from this
negativa que estamos
situation,
viviendo
this negative
y
situation we're living.
particularmente,
And in particular,
bueno, es ahorrar, ¿verdad?
it's
Ahorrar para
to
tiempos
save
difíciles, ahorrar
for difficult
también para
times,
situaciones que nos pueden
also
venir
for
de un momento al
situations that
otro.
could come from
Y
one minute to the
justamente
other.
en varias reuniones había hablado
And in many
que las
meetings,
escuelas
I
deciden
had
crear fondos
heard
para
talking
emergencias, no
about
esperar que
making
suceda
emergency
una
funds. Don't
situación
wait for a
para generar
situation
fondos de emergencia,
to
porque realmente
have
siempre va a haber
emergency
algo que
funds
sea
because there will
emergente.
always
O
be
igual el
something
distrito,
that could come up
ellos tenían
quickly, or
ya
the district.
un plan
They already
cuando
had a
pasó la
plan when
pandemia,
the pandemic
entonces
happened.
luego simplemente lo quitaron
They just took it
porque ya
away
se fue la pandemia,
because the
pero no
pandemic's
tuvieron un
over.
plan B,
But they didn't have
que
a
si
plan
llegara a
B
suceder algo
if something
parecido,
were
cuál iba a ser
similar
la
were to
situación.
happen, what would be the
Igual,
situation?
yo pienso que
I
todas las
think
familias
all
que
the
tienen
families that
estudiantes
have
deberían tener
students
acceso
should
por lo
have
menos a un plan
access
básico de
to a
internet.
basic plan of internet.
Entonces creo que es un aprendizaje para
So this is
todos,
a learning
como
piece for
familia buscar
everyone, as
recursos y
families to
también
look
como
for
distrito
resources, and
preocuparse
also
un
as a
poquito más
district
allá
to
de solo el
be a little
aprendizaje de
more
los niños,
aware of
aunque
things other
reconozco
than
que
the
es
learning.
difícil
I know it's hard
manejar
to,
dos
to run both
situaciones,
situations,
pero enseñar a los
but
padres de que
teach the
existen estos
parents
recursos
that these
facilitaría
are
este tipo de
resources
emergencias.
and this would help
Realmente
them
en
during
cuanto
these
a
times
lo
of
que estamos
emergency
viviendo y lo
with
que es
what we're
difícil
living and
acceder
what
a un.
is challenging to access.
Eso ha sido para mí
For
realmente creo que
me,
las
that's
partes más
been the most
fundamentales
fundamental parts.
y lo que hablo con las familias,
And when I talk
aprender
with the
a
families
utilizar
is
nuestros
learn to
recursos,
use
porque
our
muchas veces
resources. Because
no
many times
pensamos en que va a venir un
we
futuro que
don't
podría
think that there
pasar
will be a future
y
where
bueno,
something
es un
like this might
aprendizaje para
happen.
todos.
So it's a time of learning for all of us.
There's a lot of people working really hard and not in a relationship. And that's the biggest learning about why the organization is successful is because we have Latino leadership and we know how to follow, and we know how to be truly responsive. We know how important it is who's making the calls. And, you know, that we have these like extensive WhatsApp networks when everyone else is, you know, Signal. And like none of those Signal groups are bilingual.
Right.
Even early on when people were doing like these big hundreds and thousands of people training around how to use the whistles, none of that was in Spanish either.
Right.
So early on, people be whistling their heart out, and no, like the people who should have taken whistling as a cue were like, "Why are you whistling?" And it's like, how are you going to organize in solidarity if the people that you're trying to protect don't even know the signals for protection? Right?
Yeah. Hopefully the acute crisis in Minneapolis is coming to an end, and I'm sure that is not the end of the crisis that this has caused. You mentioned it's going to take a really long time to the emotional harm that's been done, just the financial burden that people are going to slowly have to dig out from, months and months behind on rent, people now looking for work again or whatnot. For people who have not had this come to their city yet, and I do say yet because I think it's probably coming for most of us, but you know, what do you think Minneapolis needs now to start to heal?
Yo pienso que, bueno, en las escuelas,
Well, in the
brindarles el
schools,
apoyo
give
emocional y
them
soporte
emotional
emocional
support
a los chicos,
to the
sobre
kids,
todo ser un poco más
be a
flexibles,
little more flexible.
que los chicos que estaban en
The kids that
aprendizaje
were on
virtual
virtual
van a
learning
tener más desafíos
are going to
cuando
have more
regresen a
challenges
las
when they come back to
presenciales.
their in-person classes.
Carina, what does Minneapolis need now?
Yeah, well, I think the turning point for me was when I realized what mutual aid means. And I am so lucky to be in close relationship with so many of the families that are trapped in their homes. And when I've been out rushing around doing stuff, they've been feeding me. Like they've been making me the meal prep that I've never made for myself in my whole life.
Right.
I have not cooked in months because each week a different organizational leader who is homebound is making food for my whole family. And I just wish that for other helpers and for people who are isolated, to have someone that they can engage in mutual aid and mutual like collective care with. I spent, the first month just like dark spiral down, and I got to a real bad place because the relationships allowed me to see so many bad experiences. And then I started allowing it to come back to me. And everyone deserves to have that come back and to be able to give and not just be seen as a victim or vulnerable.
Amen.
And that's what I would say is another like advice I have for other cities is like the partnership between school and neighborhood is so important.
Yeah.
And we were so lucky to we got this grant from the city of Minneapolis called the Partnership Engagement Fund. So for 3 years, we've been really like systemically partnering between school and community. And now all those people are our patrols. Nice. All those people are like sending our kids at home Valentines. Like there's and that was huge, is that we didn't have to start building trust and relationships with our neighbors in crisis that were already there.
This is beautiful. I just can't say thank you enough for sharing, for all the work that you're doing in Minneapolis right now, holding up the community. And I know that there are lots of people out there doing this sort of work. I think it's inspiring. It's terrifying. I feel just heartbroken that it is happening, and also so grateful that there are people who can step up and lean into mutual aid and do the work that you are all doing. So thank you for coming and sharing it.
Thank you.
Good.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Cisne.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Buenas noches.
Bill Down, what'd you think?
I think we need to give listeners time to process everything that they heard. I think the words of our guests are heavy and real, and I don't know that we can do it much justice, my friend.
Yes, I think the voices of Carina and Cisne and our interpreter are probably plenty to leave folks with. So again, deep gratitude to all three of them for joining us, to the incredible gift that the interpreter provided. We were fortunate at the end of the interview that the interpreter was willing to stick around, and we had a little conversation with her about why she does the work she does and how she views it as her part in social justice. And so we'll take a little listen to some of what she has to say about that.
Well,
Thank you for appreciating language access and for being an example of what that looks like and what that can sound like and how you can really support people to build bridges and build community.
And speak for themselves.
And speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And feel empowered to speak for themselves and know that their words are being heard and it's not a summary.
Right.
Yeah, we have not tried something like this before, and it certainly opens my eyes to what's possible. And
well, thank you for being open and being curious and for helping show people the possibilities.
Yeah.
Shout out to Zoom for creating the tools to make it so easy to do. Like the technology we have now between, translation and interpretation and the tools to actually do that in real time. There's just there's no excuse not to.
But we also need to invest in our interpreters. And that's another piece to this bilingual education is investing in the students who are benefiting from this dual language learning and culture and peace. Because there's a lot of people, interpreters who've been doing this for a long time that are retiring, and we need more people. We need to develop and strengthen and support the next generation of interpreters, and students who go through this bilingual program, they have a great head start.
This gift that you have, I get the sense that underneath there you feel a real calling to this for social justice reasons, that this is not just a job that you're doing because it's a skill set you have, but that there is real power, that you believe in the cause.
Absolutely. As an interpreter, I spend the day and I never use my voice for my own thoughts and words. My voice is always, I'm speaking other people's words. It's not a place that I'm used to being in, sharing my thoughts or my opinions, but it's an important thing to talk about because so many people need dependable, accurate interpretation. That's not a summary, that's not explained, that's not AI. We need to retain that human connection. Last year there was a pilot project to see if students wanted to shadow me or observe me or take notes, or they're already interpreting for their families and friends, but they need guidance and they need support and they need to be empowered. It's a big responsibility to speak for someone else, and you have to be respectful with their words, not add to it, not take away from it, not make it small, not summarize it, and not clean it up. What they say is what they say. Those are their words. They're not my words. I am just the bridge to carry that information so other people can join in that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, Cisne had Val and I in tears through your interpretation work. It's just such a gift. I can't thank you enough for it.
Thank you for allowing the space, and thank you for allowing a little extra time to talk about language access and the importance it can have on both communities and how powerful this person was. Even though she's struggling, look at what she's still doing in her community. She's still supporting her community. So we can learn from that, and our kids can learn from that. How to be the citizens of the future, the interpreters of the future, the leaders of the future. Yeah.
Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
After listening to our interpreter friend, it is a reminder that we can take action. And so if that means asking the question, like, can we get interpretation for this meeting? Or can we center and make sure we have representation on our boards? Like, there are things that we can do. What I absolutely love about Carina is her ability, willingness, and commitment to sharing power.
Yeah.
That woman is undefeated, of looking around and saying, like, you absolutely should be wielding some of this power. It is not just about me. It is about us. And I think that is something that we can certainly embody as well.
Yeah. And so, listeners, as we leave you with this episode to chew on, imagining there will be folks who want to help in some way. And unfortunately, the logistics of that are tricky, given that we are trying to protect this organization's identity. But what we can do is promise that if it seems at some point like it is safer, we will definitely share their information and encourage you to contribute. But in the meantime, in your own communities, there are ways to get connected. And fortunately, it seems that potentially at least the acute crisis in Minneapolis is ending. But we know that there are plans to expand these operations to other cities. So most likely wherever you're listening from right now is on the list. And this similar crisis will be coming to your towns. So just a few things you can do in your own communities to start planning for what happens when it shows up for you. And I think, a place to start is just making sure that you have contact information for other families in your community, that people know how to find you, that you know how to find other people, getting in touch with the people in your school that you know are the most connected to the most families. So is that the social worker? Is that the community liaison? Start building those networks now. I think this organization that Carina and Cisne are part of has a long history of established trust and relationships, which is a great thing to rely on in a crisis. And even if you don't have the years to build that right now, starting to strengthen those ties to your community is a huge first step to prepare yourself for the inevitable arrival of a similar situation.
Yeah. And as a person who lives in a city where we had a similar situation, I can say that people don't stop needing help once they leave, right? I think this is an opportunity for us to really double down on opportunities to engage in mutual aid for our communities. I'm thinking about what Cisne said in terms of saving for emergencies. You can never do enough of that, right? Never have enough of a nest egg because you just don't know. And so we are grateful that it seems like the worst is over, and we know that we need to continue to stay invested, to stay connected, because I think oftentimes people feel abandoned.
Yeah, I guess just leave listeners with a thought that Paula, who connected me to Carina in the first place, said when she and I were talking, that relationships help keep us safe and not systems. So wherever you can lean into the existing relationships you have or establishing new relationships, that is never going to lead you astray.
That's right. Thank you for being in a relationship with me.
Thank you, Val. It is always a gift to be in these conversations, even if they aren't necessarily fun or lighthearted, but certainly enriching, and I'm very grateful for it as I try to know better and do better.
Me too. And until next time.